Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 491 of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Easy, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Abe Stein.
Heyo.
And Mason, you feeling okay, Clark?
Away.
You doing okay, buddy?
Yeah, I got a little sniffle on my nose, but besides that, I'm feeling pretty. Yeah, I kind of stayed in bed today, so I'm here. Yeah.
Get a little nappy nap in?
Yeah, I got a little nap in. I slept in a little. I woke up actually earlier than normal, and then went back to sleep. And so.
Yeah. Well, I think that a nap is one of those things that can, for me, kind of put me in a better place than I was. Kind of always improving, so to speak. So that is the first segment of our show this week. We're going to talk about always improving, the things that we've been doing to try and improve at Magic the Gathering or life in general. And it's my turn to go first, according to the show notes. And I am going to talk about something that I followed up on immediately. Actually, more than immediately. So if you're in the Discord for our Patreon, you might already know this. But last show, I talked about wanting to just go headfirst into conquering my online fears and just like really go harder at it this year on both Magic Online and Arena in any ways that I decide to engage in the game. And so I was going to play Amulet Titan in the challenge, the last challenge of December, but was kind of not feeling it that day. I went to bed the night before. Was going to bed the night before and thought, oh man, like I really have a stressful week coming up, and I'm not sure that I'm like feeling like Amulet Titan in my mental space. And what was funny is that typically, I would just not play the challenge. I'd just be like, oh, that's fine, I'll just skip this one. But I really wanted to get a head start on my goal, and so I was like, well, I have a Tron list that I'm pretty comfortable with. And that deck, it's Tron. So fire that off. Was able to fight through the challenge, missing out on top 52 on tiebreakers. But regardless of the result, which, I thought I did pretty well, I was really proud of me just following through. And in a coaching session this last week, one of the things that we talked about was this idea that I think a lot of players miss. Like, a lot of players talk about how they want to go to the Pro Tour, they want to go to the regional championship, they want to get better at Magic, but they don't actually make the decision to do those things. It's just a thing in their head, the thing that they say out loud, rather than putting in like active efforts to achieve those type of things. And it was really nice because I used my goal as an example this year, and how I took immediate actions towards that goal. And it honestly felt really good. So that's kind of where I'm at. Abe, you're up next.
Yeah, in a similar vein to You're Always Improving, Spencer, but in not as directly tied to my goals for like the year, but definitely tied to my goals for the next couple of months. The RC in Denver is coming up in about a month. The Pro Tour is coming up in about a month and 3/4. And so I, for the last couple weeks, have been starting up, like, budgeting out more time to just be playing games than I normally do. Like, most of my process is typically doing a lot of, like, deck list research, but so much has changed in the formats recently that making sure I really have the play patterns down now before I'm coming to like make a decision and start to commit to a deck and really understand the format as a whole has been a big priority of mine. So I've started playing and like made a plan for myself of like I'm playing 6 leagues at minimum a week, 3 of each format, and then that's going to transition to the same number of Pioneer matches, either like that time being like continuing to being leagues or being like in-house testing with Sanctum of All, and then being like at least one like traditional draft on Arena or Magic Online draft or in-house draft, whatever we can get going of the new set once it comes out after the RC. And I don't know, it's just like hitting the streets and just getting, especially with how much has changed in both modern and Pioneer, with bannings in both those formats and unbannings in Pioneer, and like a lot of change that kind of needs to be understood, and the change thing's really making putting pressure on me to do that. And yeah, it's just been good to get out there and just start jamming again, especially just getting a lot more hours in than I have been previously. And yeah, it's been good so far.
I love that. Mason?
Yeah, my always improving moment came from the event this past weekend at SCG Cincinnati, and it was from basically just like being pretty tired and drained from everything going into Saturday night. Stayed up, hanging out with people, whatever, talking, and then just realizing like, hey, like I don't have to play the tournament tomorrow. Yes, I'm here. Normally I would just get up and play the 10K, especially with like how small the events were this weekend, like it's like pretty good value to get up and play. But I decided that like I wasn't really feeling up to it, and I valued like resting and feeling healthy for other things going on in my life right now. And just kind of a moment of like, it's really easy to be like some cost of like, well, you drove all the way up here, you booked the hotel for like another day because you're going to play in this tournament. Like, shouldn't you just do this thing? And instead it's like, no, I'm just going to like sleep in and relax and hang out with my friends and do that stuff instead of playing the event, because I just didn't think it was a wise choice to do. And that's my most improvement.
Dude, let's go. Mason Clark beat the sunk cost fallacy. Let's go. It's like so hard to do because your brain literally does not agree. But I don't know. I'm proud of you. It's so hard to beat the sunk cost fallacy. It's like crazy.
Thank you. Yeah. It was, it's doesn't sound like a huge thing, but like, it was good to kind of do it. And I think it was net good. Like, I sound kind of sick. I feel fairly good. My throat from talking all weekend's kind of drained, but I'm here. I'm vibing. We're moving forward.
I know that you say it's like not a big deal, but I actually think that's one of the harder things in Magic. Like different types of those fallacies where your brain tells you one thing that is not true is actually really hard to overcome for a lot of players. And while this one might seem easy, right? Because you're like, oh well, I was sick. Like obviously, I'm not gonna fall victim to this. I do think that you just talked about why your brain told you that you should fall victim to it.
Very true. Yeah. You know what I'm never going to fall victim to, Spencer? Forgetting our patrons.
That's right. We have 2 new patrons this week. We're going to give a shout out to our new patrons every week. This week we have Max and Sam. Thank you so much, Max and Sam. It means the world every time we get that notification letting us know that somebody feels like, that what we're offering is of value to you and that it's helping you in some way where you can give back a little bit to the show. It means the world. It really does. So, you know what else means the world is our sponsors. Don't check out the affiliate link below for Untapped.gg. I talked about what's so funny is I talked about the mana thing on Untapped.gg. Somebody downloaded it and immediately was like, "Oh my gosh, I miscounted my sources. My deck is wrong," and messaged me because of the podcast that they were able to fix their mana base before an arena event. So I thought that was dope.
Let's go.
Yeah, it really is dope. So. And then I was shaming somebody in our Discord for not having it while I was watching them, and turns out it doesn't share over Discord. Like the overlay doesn't share because you're sharing the application. So what you got to do, fam, is you got to share the screen, and then it will share. So just fun facts, helpful tidbits for Untapped.gg. We also have a new sponsor, and that is Mana Candles. I actually have already almost used one of my candles. Sorry, for those audio listeners, I turned around to grab it. Like it's almost gone. That's how much I've been loving this candle. I got sent the Elven Forest, which obviously I would get sent, and the Fire Mountain, which obviously I would get sent. Let's go Gruul colors. But they have a candle for each of the mana symbols. And what was really funny is like we got talked about on a popular Magic stream because of this. I don't know if do you guys know this anecdote, Abe?
I haven't heard the story of us getting talked about. No.
Yeah. So I think it's Magic Systems It's a
No,
stream.
System Magic.
System Magic,
The
thank you.
all-American stream.
Yeah. Where the fact that we and I guess I can announce it here because it will happen this week. We and Drafting Archetypes got this sponsorship before them. They were not happy about it. They were like, man, we wanted this so bad. So I just want to thank Nana Candles because my wife loves candles. Like my house smells a lot better because of it, and they're actually like really good quality. I don't know how you guys felt about the packaging, but like I was like, they come in like these little bags. Like there was no way they were gonna break. I gave each of one of the bags to each of my kids. They were really excited. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I gotta say, big ups to the packaging. It's like, it's got the Crown Royal effect. I don't know if y'all at your LGSs had the people who would always. I feel like every LGS in America has at least one of these people. Where they have the Crown Royal dice bag, but you get like a whole like bag comes in. It's really top notch. The scents are good. I got the blue one and the black one, and I really have enjoyed them. I'm also a candle person. I don't know if Mason, what did you get? What was your color?
What do you think I got?
Well, I'm assuming you got the white one if we're doing a full sampling.
Yeah, I got the white, and I don't know the other one. It's still in the packaging because I don't have room to put another one out. So it's a surprise to everyone.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
It's
I
lucky
think I got the rainbow one.
It's lucky that you opened the white one. Like you could have opened.
Yeah, I have it like in its bag still and everything too. I have it there, so because I've got the candle out, but I got it right before I left for the SCG, and then I came back here, and I've just been not out there yet, but I plan to light it up soon.
Yeah, that's so funny. I had not thought of using for those watching the video, I do have the bag on my desk because Maxwell put his right here. I had not thought that you can just literally just use this as a dice bag now. That's dope.
I thought they were supposed to be dice bags when I opened it up.
That's dope. So, if you want to check out their store, I'm going to put the link to Mana Candles. You can also go to our sponsorship page. It has the affiliate link to Untapped GG and the link to Mana Candles. But yeah, thank you so much. Legitimately love the product. Like I had to show how much of the candle I've already used because I was getting low on the other candle by my Xbox. So, all right, that is going to do it for kind of the housekeeping and stuff like that. Let's go into our main topic. We are doing a power rankings episode. This is the reigning episode series of the year from the CCMTG Awards, and this was a more interesting power rankings to make, and I'm going to go over kind of how this works. So, if you're new to the show, the way that power rankings work is we give points according to finish, and it's kind of based on an old Frank Karsten article on how to rank Magic decks, and then we equated that into how we kind of made our power rankings back then. So you get 6 points for a first, 5 points for a second, 4 for a top 4, 3 for a top 8, 2 for a top 16, and because of the events that were available to us this time, we even included top 16s with 1 point, or top 32s with 1 point. The one that did not have this info, however, was the... Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting which one did not have it. We could only get top 16s from the 10K. The SCG 10K was all that was available because of the way that they displayed the info. I probably could have gotten the rest of it somewhere else, but I just wanted to call it that we did only do top 16s for that event. So the SCG 10K, the SCG 20K, and the Modern Showcase are what I included in this. So we didn't include any of the other challenge from the weekend. I just wanted to include like the largest events of the weekend to take a snapshot of the weekend. Any thoughts or anything before we dive in, guys?
I want to say from like a data perspective, we're entering like a really interesting time. And it's going to probably affect the show too when it comes to rankings going forward. And that is that all the Magic Online data is out there now. So if you are someone who really likes data in like deck list information, it used to be that we would get like the top like 32 or 16 or whatever like the kind of payout was for Magic Online deck lists. Well, we now see everything when an event ends. So you see everyone who goes 0-2, you see the people who win, you get all that information. And it's been really interesting to sort of see the like movement in data and kind of like people have started collecting it, and we're getting like better confidence intervals and seeing kind of like what things look like in modern and kind of like what decks look like over multiple weeks. And I think it's going to be really interesting period going into the RC at the beginning of next month, and just generally going forward in Magic of like how stuff looks. Because I was talking to people this weekend. We really haven't had this much data in a very, very long time from anywhere. And it is very interesting to see what comes out of this data. So it's going to be interesting to kind of talk about that as we talk through all this as well. Because sometimes, like some things get like have good weekends, but like, and we don't have enough data currently for like a huge picture, but like once we have 3-4 months of modern data, I think it's going to be really interesting to see sort of kind of what happens, and also just like in month blips. So that's kind of just something I want to talk about. That like I think we're entering a new age of like Magic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's almost like returning to the old age. I think we didn't have challenges the last time that we got all the Magic Online data. It was back when we had dailies, which are more similar to like prelims than anything. So it's been a long time since getting this much info, and now we have it with like, what are they, like 3Ks for like the showcases and stuff like that? They're pretty big Magic Online events. So, all right, let's go over this. So in the honorable mention slot, we only have one deck that I felt like was deserving of honorable mentions. We don't really go too far into, and that's Scales. Scales comes in with 6 points over the 3 events. I think that we're gonna see as we go through this data that when you look at the way that the power rankings are set up on the show, and this is a good time to talk about this, is there's like a certain number of decks that will get points from like sheer number of people playing them, and then there's decks that get number of points from like, oh, this deck's like really good. And Scales kind of falls into that, like it doesn't see a lot of play on Magic Online already, and so when it does come on the list, which it has not been, I think I looked at the last like 2 times we did actual power rankings, and it was not making the power rankings before, so it's actually an increase for this deck in my opinion, and it's a really strong deck. It has a lot going on, and it's one of the decks that I lost to in the challenge recently. That you kind of got to be impressed with Scales in the format, but it is so hard to play. Like it is a grueling deck to play for a long event. Like if you were taking this to the SCG, I think it would be really hard.
Yeah, I think like Scales definitely. I was kind of concerned Scales would fall off. I think there might have been a time if we'd done a power rankings episode like right before the bans, where it might have been maybe in our top like our mentioned decks, just because of how good his matchup was against a lot of the Fury stuff, and especially against Scam. But for that to like hold on and still be that good, even with some of its issues being a little bit clunky and being full of 2-drops in a format like Modern, where that's not necessarily an option for a lot of things, it still does pack quite a punch. It's definitely still out there, and I don't know if it's like a number of pilots. It'll be interesting to see how it's adapting to the rest of what's going on.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see sort of how this deck scales with time. I think it has some issues where like one of its better matchups was Scam. Like those kind of decks are something that the hard Scales deck really preys on, along with things like Tron, like hard decks that can't interact with it very well. While Karn the Great Creator is really good against it, like the rest of the deck isn't so great. Like even Oblivion Stone can sometimes not be enough. It's a very weird deck. So all in all, I think Scales is like a good deck and very hard, kind of like Spencer said, and playing it over a long period of time I think is challenging. And things like your Yogg matchup not being great, your Tide matchup not being great, your Rhinos matchup, if they choose to respect you, is not great. If not, it's okay. So I think there are some things that put Scales in a bit of an awkward position, but I do think it is a deck that, like, if you put a lot of time into, you can get a lot out of it in a way that's like not as true as some other decks. Or I should say, like, the time you put into it, I think, is much more fruitful than if you were playing a deck like Murktide, where like having general format knowledge would be pretty supplementary for Murktide in a way that like does not translate directly to Hardened Scales.
I want to talk about the next deck in a similar, like, playability in different types of events type of thing, because the next deck, the number 8 deck is it's blue white, It's specifically the Kira deck, and I have a real 100% of this deck's points, for what it's worth, came from paper events, and I think that is interesting because this deck has not come close to making the power rankings when we do like a mega rankings episode or anything like that, and it almost always, every time it does make the list, gets its points from paper events, and I just want to I just don't understand why. Like, there's nothing is stopping. There's no barrier to entry to playing this on Magic Online. Like, what I'm curious what would cause this very big divergent from the online metagame.
I would say that, like, if there is one thing that might be different, it's the clock. Like, I think that the deck is pretty daunting to try to play on Magic Online when a lot of your opponents, if your deck is really kill condition light, a lot of your opponents can just decide they want to try to draw the game out to you clocking, and that can be pretty frustrating and detrimental. And also, I think that just among the players online who want to pick reactive strategies, the friction between changing reactive strategies, especially on like a moment's notice with the way the card economy is a lot easier. And I think in paper also, like, just in general, people have less experience playing against the control decks, and like I think because of that they might overperform a bit. But I think the number one difference to me is definitely the clock. Like, when you put it in perspective of that, it's pretty, like, it's the same reason, like, I don't know, decks like Devoted Druid are like underrepresented, or like Heliod combo was a bit underrepresented, or like was difficult to maneuver playing, or even Amalia is like a lot to play on Magic Online because it just can take a lot of clicks. And like when you're playing those long drawn out games, you can just get timed out. And I think some players are really versed to that. And I think a lot of the like Moto grinders are also like Moto grinders don't like playing blue light control, and I think that paper grinders do. Like, why that is, I can't tell you, but I think that is just kind of a universal fact of Magic grinders.
I don't want to like derail the podcast too much about this, but I really hope it's not the play clock, and I'll say why. I got into a heated discussion once at a GP about slow play because I really felt like my opponent was slow playing me, and I was like if you think about it, we both really only have 25 minutes, and they're like, no, there's 50 minutes on the clock. That's not how it works. I'm like, I understand that, but like you are taking such a large percentage of this that it gives me less time, and that is an unfair advantage to you. You need to play faster. And like, if that is what is happening, then I would encourage people not to play blue-white even in paper, because that's not fair. And I agree. I think that is what's happening. I just also think that it is wrong if that is what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know how to have this derail the podcast too much too, but like let's think about things from like the Mason Clark perspective. I am someone who my job is Magic. My job is like to be a coach and personality, and it is hard for me to tell someone to play quicker, right? And like past like the first thing, it is like awkward for me. I'm putting like even more social constraints than the normal person, which has led to me having to play very fast in lots of spots. And I end up playing decks like 4-color like a fair amount of the time, like 2 years ago, almost now, where like that was sort of a thing that like I did, and I like had only one draw where I think a judge gave me an unfair ruling, but that's what it is, unintentional, I should say. And then like outside of that, like it sort of puts me in a position where I kind of just have to play quicker because I can't really get myself in those positions. And I see other people feel similar ways without even the job pressure on things, right? And I think that blue-white players do get actually sometimes more clock, because when blue-white's going well, you don't need much time to think, right? If I've got my stuff going, or like I've Narset Days Undoing due already, at that point, you're gonna be able to win pretty well if your opponent is trying to respect the clock as well. And so you can be playing really quickly, but your opponent also is playing quickly, and they're actually, not giving themselves as much time as they deserve because they don't want to get in a situation where they get a draw, right? So it's almost even like the fear of it, which is like to your points, which are like I think there's like unfair economics, and it's very hard to prove. And I only have like incidental evidence or anecdotal evidence, excuse me. But I do think that's somewhat there, and I do think that like what Abe said as well of like the average Moto player is much more experienced versus this sort of thing, and is typically just a better Magic player. And so some of Blue White's strengths like then leave. Where I do think Blue White Control has some good things going for it. Like I think main deck Chalice is pretty good against a couple decks right now. I think the Narset Days of Doing Stuff is surprisingly good. I thought it was going to be kind of weak. I was testing it for Cincy, but it was like kind of nice. Like there are good things about Blue White, but there are lots of also bad exploitable things about Blue White that stay true of what we talked about other decks. And I also think that historically there's been some amount of like, well, 4-color control is the better control deck because you can actually win games too. I don't know. I think there's a lot of factors going on, but I do think that like Blue White Control kind of is in this weird position where I'd be curious to know what happened if there was like some AI that could watch the games and like stopwatch who took time where. You know what I mean?
Sick.
Yeah, like I think that would be I'd be very interested to know what that data is.
Yeah, I wonder. Obviously, like a literal like chess clock is too much to ask for in Magic, because like you'd be clicking it so much, kind of like Magic Online. But I do think that I try not to play decks that I'm going to take up more time than is my fair share. So that being said, I did put us on the tangent, but I do think that there's a lot of things going on with Blue White that are like really strong. I also think that everything that I really like about Blue White, I also get from Green White decks. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on that, but yeah, I think the deck is, it has good cards. There's been enough good Blue-White Control decks throughout its history to kind of build up a pretty strong, reasonable deck in the format. And I think that, it's one of the really nice things. I think all of them splashed red as well. Like, I got to double check on that. But, yeah, they're just good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the core of, like, Blue-White is the pillar of a format that is Solitude and the One Ring, and then like various other tools for fighting the other unfair axes of the format, right? Like Narset is a way to fight the One Ring, like battles of just shutting off their ability to draw additional cards. Teferi is a way to shut off the Cascade decks, and also, like be able to force through your permission against some of the like bigger Haymaker decks. Like you're saying, Mason, like Narset Days on doing stuff is a way to actually put the game into a spot of like, okay, we're done here, we can pack it up. But I'm not sold on the idea that like Blue White is the best way to use that engine, but that engine of like, okay, I've got the One Ring and a bunch of 1-for-1s, and Solitude is a way to subsidize my One Rings and like support myself as I'm tapping out for these Planeswalkers, is like, is definitely really good. So yeah, that's like, I think it's important to, as much as we're kind of like being a little down on old man Blue White here, it does have like a pretty strong core to it. I think it's important to acknowledge that.
The number 7 deck is 4-color control. Every version of this that got points was a Delighted Halfling version of the deck. I think that this deck has a lot of the same strengths as Blue White. It gets to do things a little bit different. It has kind of more new age power and relies less on synergy. I don't know. That's maybe not true. It does have more like bang for its buck, I think, than Blue White does in a lot of ways. But other than that, like it is just a tap out control deck that happens to be playing Delighted Halfling.
Yeah, I almost played 4-color control at this RC, but not with red cards. So
You mean the
Jordan
SCG?
Lindsay. Yes, my mistake. The SCG, thank you. The white Amiria, the Sky Ruin build of things, where it's every color but red. I mean, you have red for stuff, but like you don't really have red. Just your leyline bindings. So that was something that was really interesting to me. I think the Delighted Halfling stuff makes the most sense if you're going to be playing like Omnath 4-color. I think you need to be able to like turn 2 to Fairy. You need to be able to have your Omnath protected. It all still feels weak. I know someone top 8'd with the Amir of the Sky Ruin deck and beat Jake Beardsley in top 12 of the SCG and then lost in top 4, if I remember correctly. And so like they seem to be pretty happy with that deck. It is quite good. Honestly, the only reason I didn't play it in the event was I felt like it needed a little bit more work to kind of finish getting there. But, end of the day, I think the 4-color deck is quite good. It is something that you can be happy playing and, is all right. I can't help but feel, and I don't know how y'all feel about this, I don't want to tangent this too much, that there's a lot of work with 4-color Omnath stuff and like the big draws that you have to play Omnath Ring, but the rest of the stuff just feels weaker to me than the creativity decks. And I feel like the creativity decks are kind of like where 4 colors should be, unless the Ring Omnath stuff in particular is really strong. But yeah, to like wrap that point up, I think that kind of deck has some stuff to it. For what it's worth, if you look at SCG, like I am right now for the 20K, it's going to say Esper midrange. It does play like green cards. Like it has things like Haywire Might. Maybe we're being a little pedantic calling it 4-color. Maybe it really is Esper. Who knows? But this is all to say that I feel like a lot of the strength of the 4-color decks right now is in like the Ring, and a lot of people are choosing Omnath to pair that with. This person's pairing Shieldred with the Ring, which is another strong combination. We're seeing that kind of be the thing. And I do believe the Ring to be really, really strong. But outside of the Ring plus way to mitigate the Ring's cost, it feels to me like creativity is maybe the better interactive deck that goes over the top somehow currently with the way things are set up. I don't know that for sure, and I'm kind of curious what y'all think about things without derailing us too hard off 4-color.
Yeah, so I would not play the Delighted Halfling version of 4-color. I actually think that like everything that I like about blue-white control and 4-color control combines into a Bring to Light. Sorry, I would not play. I think I said that wrong. I would not play a Delighted Halfling version. I would play a Bring to Light version if I was going to play 4-color. However, kind of like Mason said, I was texting my team this week that I was like, honestly, like creativity seems to be in a really good spot right now. And if I'm going to play an interactive deck that's like trying to go over the top of people, I would much rather be on creativity than like any of this stuff. So I'm on the same page as you, Mason. When Jerry won that event, I think he won like a trial, and he posted his deck list. I was looking at it and just thinking like, okay, well, what's doing well right now? Like, what do matchups look like? And I would much rather be there than most places. Obviously, spoiler alert, that does not make our top 8 decks. It did get points though. Abe, what about you?
What I gotta say is, listen, we all gotta wake up and realize it's 2024. It's not 2022 anymore. Renin 6 is not the card it used to be. All right, Renin 6's time is over. The One Ring, that's how you draw cards. That's all that matters. If you're trying to make your mana bad to play Omnath, Renin 6, what, Poob? No one says Poob anymore. No one plays these 4-color decks. It's not a thing. Mason ended it. He started it. He finished it. It's over. Stop trying it. Do something else. Up the Beanstalk was nice, but that was all more Solitude problems. Once again, all of these decks we're talking about, like seriously, even looking at all of them, including the Esper, with splashes for Leyline Binding, is like the actual cards that matter in the format to play one of these strategies, and the shells around it are Leyline Binding, Solitude, and the One Ring, and then maybe Teferi, maybe some other white removal. Your white card base. That's everything that actually matters. And, how you support that is it matters, but it's somewhat discretionary. I don't think that playing a bunch of Omnaths even really helps as much as it feels like it should, because Omnath isn't effectively generating a mana advantage you can use in a lot of the ways I'm seeing these decks constructed, because it just snowballs to being like an Omnath and the Solitude in play, and you can find a bunch of ways to make something like that happen. So
it's really funny that you're saying that too, because as Mason, I think it was Mason, as he was talking about, one of you mentioned it's the One Ring and it's Haymakers. and then like, it's a bunch of 1-for-1s and then haymakers and stuff. And I was like, you're describing mono green Tron, but I would not play mono green Tron in this format. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that some of Tron's issues, not to like get too in the weeds about it, but I think some of Tron's issues are they don't interact as well. Like they're just haymakers and card draw.
Yeah.
And these decks are like a lot of reaction
that's
and card
true.
draw.
That's true.
But I think that like the thing about Omnath as a card is that what is it good at? It generates you a ton of mana to use the excess of cards you're drawing. If your deck is all really efficient answers and this card draw engine of the One Ring, I mean, honestly, then it's like Omnath's most important thing is that it's a multicolor card that also gains you life to offset your One Ring, and then the mana ability isn't really relevant, so or at least in the capacity it might have been before, so it's just not the same kind of quality that's worth like stretching your mana for and opening yourself up to vulnerabilities, playing a bunch of triomes, and playing things like Halfling for when you could just play more of the impactful stuff.
Yeah, that's what I like about the Shieldred in the deck, is that Shieldred actually works better with Ring. Like, when you get things going, she gains you more life, and she dodges some cards that players like. Like, Rhino players typically load up on, well, not always, but sometimes they have a decent amount of Mystical Disputes as a way to stop Teferi, which overlaps with your Omnath. And there's things like that, and having Shieldred be a 4/5 just lines up well with Rhino bodies, lines up well against the card Yawgmoth, makes it so you can slam that, and if they go for the combo, they need to sort of have something to interact with her. So I think Shieldred's actually really well positioned with the Ring stuff. I like her a lot more, and I don't really understand the Omnath placement of things with the Ring in a real way, because Solitude is like the force of will of Modern, and it's that is the thing that will make you play the fair game and elongate things in combination with Leyline Binding. So like, it's just about finding the best shell of that. I think players are just going to be slow to realize that Shieldred is better than Omnath at specifically interacting with the One Ring, Yawgmoth, and Rhinos, which are all really big parts of the format. And they're also really good against things like Titan, where suddenly, a really bad matchup, if they are ringing and trying to get out of it, normally your Omnath doesn't matter there. Your life from the Omnath doesn't matter. The mana doesn't matter. But Shieldred shocking them does super matter.
Oh, fun fact. Well, that's our TikTok for this episode. So thank you for that tidbit there, Mason. Let's go on to the number 6 deck. It is Fish. It comes with 10 points. This is just solely top 4 and a win. Here's the thing. I sent these to my best friends. And Matt Kling, it was like Merfolk question mark, and I was like, hey man, don't shoot the messenger. This is not my fault. But also, think about it for a second. Let's think about it for a second. But I do think that there's a lot to be said about, I don't know. One, I think Hexcatcher has been one of the best cards in Modern that hard carries this deck sometimes for a long time, and this deck makes a lot of sense right now to me. I certainly didn't expect Deep Brute Pilgrimage and all the Lords to make up this deck, but we got there. We definitely got there. I don't know. I think this deck is nice. It's going to punish people really hard game 1 and then sideboard into the configuration that it needs to be through the other games. And I think that's actually a really nice place to be in Modern, where you are going to catch people unprepared, and then you get all of the information moving forward. So
yeah, I think this deck has a good Rhinos, Murktide, Titan, Scam matchup. I think it has a good matchup against all those decks. All those decks are very popular. And the losing of Fury, this is the deck, in my opinion, that Fury was the best against. That was decks that people actually registered. And could. Spoilers, we've been living without Fury for a little bit. Where's your humans decks? They weren't good enough. And I think Fish, while not strong enough, Deep Root Pilgrimage was a big ad. The Voldaren Hexcatcher is a great ad. And those cards, you're underappreciated. I haven't looked closely. I know that a lot of Merfolk lists recently were playing, some playing Chalices, some playing Subtleties main, some doing both. You get to kind of play a Prisony Element, and you just clock people really quickly and kind of throw off their mana bases, and people aren't really ready to spot kill a bunch of creatures, nor can they sometimes, thanks to things like Hexcatcher. So I think this deck's like totally reasonable. I think there are better decks than it to play, but I think it makes a lot of sense that this deck did well.
Yeah, definitely seconded the this is the deck that Fury was banned to support thing. So I'm glad it showed up at all. But I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a lot of games where if your opponent just like is playing one of these decks we were just talking about, and they stick anything that generates them out of advantage and then starts 1-for-1ing you and having time to do that, or like has Supreme Verdicts, then your game can get pretty tough. But as is, it does have a good Goldfish as ways to. I think like Tideshaper and Rashad and Dockhand are both like carrying a lot of weight here in ways to interact with the opponent's like development in the early game, because people have a lot of these like mana requirements in decks where like, you know, they're trying to be able to leyline binding you, and now they have an island instead of their Triome, or they're trying to be able to cast their like One Ring on turn 4, and now they've been ported by a Dockhand. Like those things do really add up when you're playing the beatdown creature deck, but yeah, this is a deck that could, at least in my mind, pretty easily get, you know, targeted or hated out with people showing up in ways prepared to do it. It still has a fail rate of just kind of being Merfolk, but it is still Merfolk, right? Like it still does present a good clock and have, you know, the access to, you know, a mix of disruption that just costs it extra blue idiots out of its hand, and that deck is a lot of blue idiots. So
I love it. Next up, we have Murktide coming in with 11 points. This deck has been really interesting to me over the last, I don't know, basically since the Scam ban, or the Fury ban, because one of the things that at least let me say what I was going to think, or what I thought, is that a deck that is like a reactive Jund style 1-for-1 deck would do really well in a format that is evolving, because it gets to stick to kind of its like base game plan. And instead what has ended up happening, for what it's worth, is that it either does really well in a Challenge 1 weekend, or actually horrific. Like actually so bad that like there's like almost no this is the most in between weekend for the deck since the bannings. And I think that it has become a 50-50 deck that kind of has some really rough matchups. So, for example, I think that like having a bad matchup against like Hardened Scales and Domain Aggro, for example, of like these aggressive decks that people are going to choose to try and counteract some of the stuff that we're going to talk about both later and the stuff that we've already talked about, like puts you in a pinch that you actually don't even have options to beat. Like one of the things about Jund, the people love to compare this deck to Jund, including myself, is like it had so many options. And it also had, like, listen, Ragavan's a heck of a card, but it is no Deathray Shaman. And it just doesn't do as many things. It doesn't play as many roles. It plays one role, and it plays it really well. And this deck doesn't... The color combination does not have ways to beat the things that are currently happening. Like, we have adjusted our aggro decks to the point where we're playing, like, things that will not die to Lightning Bolt just to, like, throw it at Murktide at this point. And I think that that's a real problem for the deck. And while it is one of my favorite decks in Modern, I think that's why we see it at 11 points here. Which, I have to say, is actually an improvement from before the bans. It actually is doing better still, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think since Murktides came out, I've for a long time been like, it's one of the decks I've told people like, hey, you're trying to pick one deck, kind of learn, stick with, like, Murktides got my silver approval of, like, being not the best deck, but, like, a solid deck, etc. Really looking at the data that's been scraped as well, it's very interesting. Murktide has the highest confidence interval for the lowest win rate of like highly played decks. Basically, the data says, hey, Murktide wins 49% of the time consistently, and we are very positive of this. And I think it doesn't have a lot of great matchups above it. I do think Amulet is a matchup. It is a good matchup for them that we're going to be talking about soon here. Spoilers, Amulet's in the top half of things. But I think the Murktide deck doesn't have like a lot of strength right now. And while I've long been a believer that having more Murktides than less is a good build for the deck, I almost wonder if we're supposed to be moving in a direction of like playing blue-red spells and playing like Underworld Breach or Questing Druid, I believe is the name of the card that's on the adventure, and just try to move the deck in like a different direction. Because currently it seems to not be like, it is solidly 50%. Yes, there's player skill. Yes, this doesn't account for everything. But it's hard for this deck to ever be like the best choice for a weekend. And that's a really hard place to be going into something like the RC a month from now.
I love that we're saying this. And also, I want to be clear, the Energy Championship is not on this data. Like, it's not on here. It's a split format event. I didn't include it. Shout out to Steven. I think that like that 59-50, the 49-51 deck is always going to stay like that reasonable deck gamer style deck where you're like, I can't fault you for playing this, but I am, as somebody that has been a Murktide gamer a lot, I would not play this right now.
Yeah, and before I hand it off to Abe real quick, I just want to say shout out to my friend Rayton. He got 13th at the SCG on Breakers. He's one-tricked Murktide literally since it came out. He's very good at playing Murktide. I play against him like weekly at my locals. He knows what's up. And like, you know, I think he had a good build for the weekend and everything, and still like, you know, unfortunately came up just shy. And I think that like it's very showing because I was like watching Rayton, you know, and he was like playing really well, definitely like played out of his mind in a couple spots and still like didn't, you know, had issues getting there. And I think that's just telling for the deck. I think the deck maybe needs to try doing different things if it's going to succeed. But I don't know how you feel about that, Abe.
Yeah, and I think that if you're someone who has played a lot of Murktide, now is the best time to like figure out something else that might be better than Murktide. But much in line with what you were saying, Spencer, like as far as reasonable deck gamers go, if you got Murktide in your back pocket and it's sleeved up and it's sitting on your desk and you're like, I can't pull the trigger on, you know, deck I've only played for like a couple weeks for, you know, my upcoming 2K or, you know, 1K or whatever it is, it's going to be an okay choice. You're not going to ever be choosing too wrong by playing Murktide, but there's a lot more right choices out there and decks that are playing like in ways and doing things that are just more powerful. And that's really the thing about Murktide, right? It's not a deck that's powerful. It's a deck that like is consistently good and does good things. It's like pretty flat in power level. It's pretty flat in performance too. It's never going to be just blowing everyone out of the water because you're Murktide. That's not the kind of game it tries to play. So
Gonna win so
that's
many
good
RCQs
and bad,
again
right?
next time. RCQ in the season, next modern season. I don't see this deck falling off unless Mason made something broken for us to play with. Sorry, I was waxing poetic about what you were saying there, Abe.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said, if you're a Murktide player, you can keep playing it, but it's not going to be like there were times where we talked about how it's like, oh yeah, Murktide is one of the two best decks. I think it would take a lot to happen in Modern right now for Murktide to go back to being one of the two best decks, especially when it's a deck that suffered from the loss of Fury, not gained from it. You know, like it's not one that actually got better because of the changes to the format. It lost an ability to police even more of the format, so it's losing like good interactive options for matches that matter, and that's just like pretty costly. But it's still a very consistent deck, playing by the rules of the format, playing some of the best cards in like Ragavan, Murktide Regent, Counterspell, Unholy Heat, etc. It's got good clean mana, and it has a lot of good card selection. So it can find the stuff it needs when it needs it, but you're putting a lot of the onus on your opponent to be able to maneuver through it. You're not ever going to blow anyone out of the water with it.
It's funny because like this is a deck that I avoid on Magic Online, even though I love the deck because there are so many mono black mono black coffers gamers on Magic Online that that matchup's so bad. It's so ungoshly bad that and you're gonna run into it on Magic Online. And honestly, you're probably gonna run into it in paper a lot. It's a deck that people really love, and regardless of this deck does so much on the skill diff, right? Differential, we could call it. There are some things that you can't overcome, and that's one of those matchups that's gonna be super popular. That's gonna just drag you down. And I remember back in the day, Mason and I had a conversation about Modern once where we were talking about he was like, "Oh, Spencer, why don't you like Modern?" And I was like, I just don't like running into this random crap that's the 15th best deck that I have a bad matchup against and blah blah blah. And honestly, that's kind of Murktide's life right now. It's gonna run into these. Yeah, it's the 49-51 deck, but the reason is because it has 80s and 20s. It's got its 50-50s, but it also has stinkers. So
it's Zoomer. Well, I'm not gonna say Zoomer Jund, but we're becoming our parents over here.
It is.
You know what I mean?
For what it's worth.
The circle of life continues. Everyone who's playing Murktide right now gets to know what Jund players felt like 5 years ago.
Now we had Deathrite Shaman. We were fine in every matchup. Let's go into our tied decks. We'll go Titan first. So Amulet Titan comes in with 20 points. It's probably the most talked about deck this weekend. To the point where I actually thought it would be higher on our rankings. But yeah, Amulet Titan comes in with 20 points and is a deck that I got the chance to talk about a lot. It did win the showcase. I think really helped its stock this weekend, so to speak. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Amulet Titan right now is that we talked a lot about the One Ring decks, right? And Amulet Titan doesn't try to be doing what the other One Ring decks are doing, right? It's no, I didn't get there right now, but you know what I can do? I can stop you, and then maybe I can get there next turn. And it's a completely different game plan for the One Ring than what everyone else is doing. And I think that is just a massive boon for this deck compared to the other One Ring decks. Mason, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like that comparison. It uses the card. Well, those decks might use it to buy time. They use it to buy time to win, not to buy time for more time, which is a very good delineation. And we're looking at the scrape data too. It is the second highest winning deck with the highest confidence interval, and within a percent of the next deck, the highest and best deck according to all that. And I believe it. Amulet is very, very strong. It is powerful and proactive. It puts your opponents on the back foot and has a lot of good matchups right now. And there are things that are that can prey on it. We talked about Murktide a second ago, something that I think has a good Amulet matchup. But overall, Scam recently has re-popped up that we're seeing, and we'll talk about that soon enough. But yeah, Amulet's nice. It's powerful and proactive and just kills people. And played against House of Mana actually at the SCG this past weekend. And if my deck didn't have things like main deck Blood Moon, main deck Magus type stuff, and cards in the sideboard for this matchup, I think I would have lost despite having a very good matchup, because the Amulet Masters really do have a good handle on the deck, and even the people who don't are still able to overpower people because of how many strong cards the deck has now. Somehow we're still at 61, but we move past that for now.
Yeah, I think Amulet plays Urza Saga and One Ring to the fringes of its potential. That makes sense. I think that Urza Saga and One Ring are cards where typically when they're played alone are just I'm using the whole saga and the whole One Ring, right? I'm getting the protection that turn, and then I'm gonna activate it and then be able to protect myself to activate it again and again and again, and I'm gonna be up 7 cards, and it's not gonna matter, and I'll find a way to reset it. Whereas Amulet Titan's like, no, I need a way to draw a lot of cards and make it another turn to use all the mana my deck makes. To
but
do
a lot
the
is
one thing my
three.
deck does.
Just to be clear, it's 3 cards, right? You say like a
I'm
lot.
saying no, over the course of several
right,
turns,
okay.
like with the control decks. Like, yeah, like when you're playing it most time, but in this deck, like, you're using your One Ring to establish a way to weather you're kind of using your One Ring to combat the card advantage of the other player's One Ring. Like, you're trying to engage in this just because you need the resources to throw at the fact that they only have so many good answers for what you do, and your Cavern's going to validate some number of theirs, or, you have multiple angles of attack a little bit. And then, like, Urza Saga, right, like, decks like Hammer and, like, Scales, they're, like, using it for the constructs and maybe getting some value on Chapter 3. Like, no, we're trying to get amulets into play so that we can out-mana you faster. And that is, like, both of those cards are some of the most powerful cards in Modern, objectively. And I think Amulet Titan is the only one to use them proactively in an unfair way. And I think that really, like, puts it in a league of its own in terms of evaluating what it's doing. As like a pillar of form, it's using these cards that decks are accustomed to handling and dealing with the play patterns of, but it uses them so unconventionally while also being backed by just another pressure of like the fast Titan and the combo like speed of it that make it a really dangerous and volatile deck to play against. And like you're saying, Mason, you can be a deck that has on paper a good matchup, but their draws can span from unbeatable to unplayable. And that's kind of a strength of the deck, right? Is that it's so volatile that it can just, right, as much as you'll have hands where it's like, yeah, my deck didn't really function, I have all bounce lands, I can't do anything, like, I need to draw out of it, or, maybe I'll just cast this One Ring and maybe they'll get me the thing I need, versus, like, oh, I drew a hand that no deck in Modern can beat. Like, that upside it really matters right now, I think. And just those elements together put Amulet in a pretty, like, special position, and I think the players who really understand the deck and know how to make those risk calculating decisions, especially around their keeps and around like what they're playing to with all these cards they're playing in ways that are different than every other deck in the format tries to play the same cards, like really leads to it having like a wide range of finishes, but also doing really well in the hands of the experts.
Let's have the other deck that's tied here. We got Scam coming in also with 20 points. Before this weekend, I think that if we had done like since the bans of Scam, this would have been the number one deck. I actually don't even like have a question of it. There were like weekends, like we included every challenge where it was like more than half of the top 8s. And I think that we're in a position where we went from Scam being good against like every style of creature deck to good against specific styles of creature decks, where Orcish Bowmaster is like a really key component of that. So Mason, you mentioned Merfolk as this. I would say that like Yogg also falls into this, where those are the decks that like, oh, we don't have Fury anymore. Like we can commit really hard because like Orcish Bowmaster is not going to punish us super hard compared to other things. I will say that like, maybe we're seeing a shift right now. Like maybe the downtick from the last 3 weeks or whatever number of weeks to this week is like, okay, this deck is not still the best deck by unsurmountable odds. I think that if we like look at the win percentage data for Rakdos, the only deck that comes like there are decks above it, like Amulet Titan we had just mentioned, actually has a better win percentage than it. I would argue that its good matchups are too good, and I would hope that Wizards would take fast action against this deck in the format, because I think it is holding the format back. However, if you're a reasonable deck gamer, congratulations. The last 2 decks that we've talked about are, I believe, Mason, you had some other data but I believe they're two of the highest win percentage decks by
Mhm.
like a substantial margin. I got like blue-white control above them with like way less matches, but of like
Mhm.
reasonable gamer matches, these are actually the best two decks.
You mean Rakdos and
And
Amulet?
Yeah.
Yeah, according to the data I have here from one of the things with the scraping, the confidence interval on Scam is pretty high. Like the wide range it can be, but it goes from like 53% to like 60%. So like it has like, it's going up. But yeah, it's like those, and Yawgmoth is the one that I see here is 1% higher than Amulet. But this might not have been updated with this past weekend's stuff fully yet. I maybe need to refresh it. But either way, like we're all in range here of things. And yeah, I think Scam is very good. I played Scam this past weekend. It was a very strong deck. The grief stuff's really good. I tested other grief decks going to the event, like Asmo, NT, scamming type stuff, where like you're playing the Asmo engine with these things. NT plus grief and like NT plus Death Shadow and Ragavan, all those cards are really nice. And Harlan Fear actually lost a win in for top 12 of the SCG playing Rakdos Scam, but like none of the clunky cards, and trying to playing like you can almost call it like Zoomer Scam, where it's like all hyper efficient mana cards, and his whole deck basically topped at 2 mana. Like he has a Bone Crusher Giant, but like it's like a 2 mana spell, right? Like it's only for grinding matchups, and like his deck is very low to the ground. And I think stuff like that, I'm very interested to see like how will Scam evolve. I think that's good on certain weekends. The kind of traditional Scam is better on others. I think this deck kind of has a tough Rhinos matchup. I played a lot this weekend. I ended up, I think being positive in the matchup or even, but like those didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like I should have been. So I don't know. Cards like Shieldred, which typically have been super good against Rhinos, I do think are good with like 4 color shells against Rhinos because they have a lot more interaction that can line up better and you can deploy. But I don't know. In this matchup, like Celtic gave me such a hard time. So I don't know. Long story short, Scam seems good. I'm interested to see sort of where Scam goes going forward. And it is, like really good.
Murktide with a little bit of Parmigiano.
That's true. You can steal wins, baby. My round 1 of the RC, keep saying RC. Round 1 of the SCG kept totally reasonable hand on like a Molda 6 or whatever on the draw. I had not did that for all to protect this like Adopted Voidwalker I had, hoping that would line up well because I'm in the dark. I don't know. Draw a grief, and it was like, oh, okay. And just like, grief scam my opponent, basically won the game on the spot, pulled me so far ahead. You just get to do that sometimes.
For what it's worth, in the last 30 days, there are 22 recorded matchups between Amulet Titan and Rakdos, and Rakdos has won 73% of them. So, if you're like, oh, which of these reasonable decks that we're talking about is better in the matchup? Well, there you go. Next up, coming in with 25 points, a pretty big jump considering everything, is Rhinos. This is strictly Team of Rhinos. There were no 4 or 5 color Rhinos splashing Sheoldred or Leyline Binding, stuff like that. All of this was just, straight Rhinos. This is a deck that I familiarized myself with a lot the last year. And it's good. Like, Rhinos asks the question. I know we've said this like on the podcast a lot, but I feel like, we get new listeners every week. Rhinos asks the question of like what's important in the game, and it tries to make it about these 2 4/4s, right? And it tries to make it about these specific turns. And then it is like, okay, is that what's important to you? And then when it is, it's going to win. Like those are actually the games where it wins. And then when it's not, are the games where it's going to lose. Rhinos is, in my opinion, like it is another one of those 49-51 decks, kind of like Murktide. But I actually think it's the better positioned one right now. As far as like people are trying to figure out the format, I think that they often think that they have enough for Rhinos, like in their sideboard or like in their main deck, and it turns out that you actually probably don't, and that it actually deserves a little bit more respect than you're giving it. because unlike Murktide, it has a little bit of that Parmesan, as Abe like to say. Thanks, Mason, for the the theory and magic. That like, you know, if you just like turn 3 rhinos, turn 4 rhinos, are you dead? Like, can you actually beat that? Like, because it takes a lot. So that's kind of my thoughts. What about you, Abe?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rhinos was kind of billed as being one of the decks that was going to be best positioned coming out of the bans, as it was already one of the best positioned decks with Tashana's Tidebinder coming in, giving another way to fight against just a lot of like the random stuff that matters, and also One Ring. And it has continued to do well as that. You know, like it was a good deck that lost the same card everyone else lost, but probably needed it less than other decks did in terms of, right, most time it just leaves up its interaction and has a lot of ways to trade down cards to get things off the board. It doesn't really, like, it already had Force of Vigor for the times where you need to play against stuff like a Hammer or like a Saga deck or what have you, and it has like a bunch of subtleties and tie binders for Yawgmoth, so okay, you can have a board. Well, I'm fine, and against creature decks, it can even just flash in 2 4/4s, which can eat a lot of an extraction. So, yeah, I think that Rhinos is in about as good a position as it was before, which was one of the best decks, and so it's unsurprising for me to see it continue to be like, you know, towards top of tier 1 and one of the most played decks in Modern right now.
I also think that I just want to call it that a lot of people have, like, you know, championed Living End because of how good it is against Rhinos. Of recorded matches, Living End has less than four times less recorded matches than Rhinos, and the problem is like Living End just doesn't have a winning record in the format. Like you should not play it. And because of that, like, a deck that preys on Rhinos, you know, not playable. A deck that I've you know, recently done well with in Tron, also, we'll get into this, it's not playable in the format because of these top 4 decks. And I think that, you know, that is another deck that Rhinos really struggles with. And so, I don't know, I didn't, if it's like very worst matchups are just not happening, like it's gonna do really well. Like imagine if Murktide just got to like get rid of 2 of its bad matchups. Instead Murktide's like bad matchups are just actually relevant right now. And so right now, Rhinos is on the receiving end of some good graces of the modern gods. Mason, what do you think?
I basically agree. I think, I think Living End has historically been underplayed, but I do not think that is the case now. I think it is not very good. But like Rhinos is kind of like really good. People are gunning for it. It's hard to play the Cascade strategies, especially when that stuff's happening. And this is just a powerful proactive deck with good answers. Tashana's Tidebinder is a really real magic card. Playing with Venor is a very strong magic card. Works very well with Tidebinder. So like the other cards you got, upgrade this card you were playing before, which was just fine being 1 mode. Overall, I think Rhinos is quite good, and it is an underappreciated strategy, I think, currently in Modern. When it comes to like the way people perceive itself, because like for a long time I was a Rhino pooper, but it's gotten a lot better. And like comparing this deck to the Rhino deck of 2 years ago, it's like honestly comparing apples to oranges. Like the card quality is just so much better now, and some of the cards that were like you were competing with before are just gone. You know, which is maybe a sign that Rhinos was always like fine. It could compete with Lurrus and Yorion type stuff. But for better or worse, that's where we are now. And I think Rhinos is a solid deck. I don't like it as much as Scam personally, or Yawgmoth or Titan, but I think it is good. It's like, come to me and you're like, I'm playing Rhinos at the RC or Rhinos at my 10K. I'd be like, thumbs up, seems good, good luck.
Well, you spoiler number 1, you already mentioned it. You got Yogg coming in at number 1 with 1 more point. Yogg, 26 points. I don't know, man. I want kind of you to lead the conversation on this one.
Yeah, I mean, Yawgmoth is a powerful, proactive deck that has a combo finish. It got a huge upgrade in Agatha's Soul Cauldron. That's a card that when people saw it, they immediately were like, obviously this is great Yawgmoth. And I think That goes without saying. We've seen it come up in other spots, but it is so good at helping with some of the problems where Yawgmoth before was kind of like a deck that had 8 strong cards. You know, you had like your 4 Yogs, your 4 Grists, and you have your combo that can threaten people, but you can't really do much. Now that with the Soul Cauldron, you have extra copies of those cards, and another way that's hard to interact with. It gives you a little bit of main deck graveyard hate, which is kind of nice. And the deck also lost Fury as something that was oppressing it. And while it was still doing well in a world with Fury, the loss of Fury in the format journal just means it kind of gets to run with the shock. You know, there's no chains on it. It can just run as fast as it can when it needs to. And the deck is very strong. It is able to reasonably adapt with what's going on, all things considered. And I think Yawgmoth is just a really good deck that if you play it, like if you don't know all the Yawgmoth lines, you'll still do really well. If you do, you get hyper rewarded. Zerk's something we've talked about a lot on this podcast. Zerk continues to sort of crush with the Yawg deck. And yeah, I just think the Yawg deck is very good and underappreciated. And it is hard to play, but I think that's more of an excuse from players than anything else. So I don't know. Abe, what do you think about your Yawg?
Yeah, I think that as Yawg has moved more from a combo deck to more of a like material deck with like more copies of Bowmasters, you know, the important cards being like Soul Cauldron and Grist, and just like amassing actual material and like using that to overwhelm opponents who are kind of they're accruing cards, but not necessarily accruing cards in play. It just continues to be king at accruing like material in play to use to snowball the game. And like you said, Fury was one of the big things keeping this deck down. And now that's gone. Like one of the natural things that allowed a lot of the best decks in the format to put Yawgmoth in its place. They no longer have that. And so being just a core calling deck with you know, Grist and Agatha Soul Cauldron being really, really difficult to beat interaction at any stage. Kind of the same thing we see in Pioneer right now with the Amalia decks and Return of the Ranks being like, well, you can clean up the things in the first place, but then they're still coming back and presenting a big problem. Grist and Soul Cauldron, I have to say, just continues to impress me as being such a pincher to have in deck building at all in the first place. Like, you can be playing the game and be like, well, I have to answer this Grist because it will be a problem for the entire game if I don't. And all that does is create an opportunity for your opponent to draw like Super Grist for 2 mana in Agatha Soul Cauldron or any of their existing Grists. And it's just like, there's a lot of things that build up and form like, you know, really kind of complicated and problematic board states that unless your opponent is able to kind of keep you in the stage where your cards just feel really isolated, as soon as you have the synergy of the power and numbers that like a lot of the cards that really matter in Yawgmoth use and leverage to win, like it can be over really fast. I think that the ways to control that are not necessarily in a good place in the metagame, or they're just not around anymore. So you know, it's a deck that does not surprise me to see it doing well. I think it does well even against like some of the playable fringes of the format. You know, like I mean, I still think about playing a bunch of Hammer, even though I know it's like not well positioned. And one of the things that keeps me from even going through the process of trying to figure out how to make that palatable and work is the Yawgmoth matchup. Like the fact that it gets to be in positions of being just so good against so many different things, and that creatures are so good at beating a lot of things that can get, you can even justify playing in terms of like, I'm going to get under someone or, you know, whatever. Like this deck probably mauls Merfolk. Like what are they going to do about a Yawgmoth, or what are they going to do with the fact I'm comboing creatures with just like a Force Negation or maybe a Subtlety or like one Dismember? These things aren't necessarily going to work. And yeah, it's no surprise to me that even like players like Ginger, who just always, you know, people who just, they pick a deck that they think is just the best deck under all circumstances and just play it until the end of time. Like, this is the deck that he's married to. And I think that says a lot about, like, just how good its positioning is and how strong it is fundamentally. It surprises me not at all. In fact, like, looking at the power rankings, I don't know if I said this to you guys before we started recording, but I was thinking about it as, like, if you were to go and poll Twitter last week before these events, like, hey everyone, let's make tier lists of what's good in Modern. Like, it would probably check out like A tier, like, you know, Yawgmoth, Rhinos, Power Gap, Amulet, Scam, Power Gap. Like, right, it would break down the exact way these points are broken down. And for Yawgmoth to sit at the top of that is just no surprise to me. It's just the best position deck, I think.
Yeah, I also think that, I just gave Rhinos credit for the decline of Living End. It's actually one of Yawgmoth's very, very, very worst matchups. Like it's like an unwinnable, like worse than 80-20 matchup. I'm just saying, like, if you shouldn't be playing Living End, like Mason and I are saying, that means your Yogg stock is actually rising, because it still is in that top 10 deck range, and like, if it's going to decrease because it's actually bad in the format right now, you're in a really good spot. I think that this is going to be one of those decks that I try to pick up just personally, as we talked about my goals this year. I think that it aligns a lot with that. So, all right, that is going to do it. Any kind of thoughts before we move on to our Patreon question?
Yeah, I think that right now, as much as there's a lot of instability in the format, like, the pillars are still pretty much the same. Like, we talked about how there's kind of that range of reactive One Ring decks that are kind of their own pillars standing on their own. There's still, proactive Turn 1 Ragavan interaction decks and Scam and Murktide that are kind of middle of the pack. And then there's, the top dogs, they're kind of their standalone doing their thing decks, the best of the Cascade decks, the best of the Court Calling, like half fair, half mid-range, Parmesan finish decks. And I don't know, I just think it's going to be really interesting to see if that holds. But if your deck isn't playing one of those pillars, or doesn't understand what those pillars are, like, you probably need to adapt your deck to understand that those are what's going on. And I hope that, like, if you listen to this and you don't want to be someone who's just playing one of those decks, or you have, idea of how you want to tune your deck or keep playing the deck that you have, especially if you're getting close to the RC, play what you're familiar with. You keep in mind that, like, a lot of these decks that are really succeeding, especially like Yogg and Rhinos, they're still the ones that were the most explored and best positioned coming out of the bans. So there is room for that to improve. It's going to take work and an understanding of what's going on there. And at least with where we are now, I'm not certain that there's, like, even necessarily the tools. But I'm also not familiar with things like the creativity matchups. I know that Jerry playing that deck I take that pretty seriously as a statement of how good and how well positioned it could be. But, like, you should be turning over old stones to try to find solutions to these decks that were previously held down by other things who want to succeed in the format. That's my 2 cents.
I love it. Our Patreon question this week, if you want to ask these questions, you can be a patron of $5 or more. Go to patreon.com/CCMTG. Like Dexagos asks, what important card would you put in the flawed deck of your choice, and why? I don't know that I quite understand this question, but if I were to say what important card would I put in the flawed deck of my choice, a flawed deck, in my opinion, right now is Mono Green Tron. If we go a bit like any card in history, which is how I interpreted this question, I would put, I would assume the best thing to do would be, like, put in something like, oh my gosh.
I assume this is how to fix it in current thing, not just, like, add anything.
Oh, I read this wrong then.
Yeah, because what important card would you put in? I mean, maybe, I don't know. To me, this sounds
I think yours is more helpful for the listener, so we're going to go with your version.
Sure. I would posit that what I would do is I would look at Murktide, and I would take out the Murktide card and put in the Breach card and see what we can do in that space, and try to circle back around to, like, playing that style of deck. That would be what I would do, to try to add something that isn't so answered easily by the white control decks of the format, which are consistently big problems, and maybe open up some new avenues. I think people are pretty committed to always going all in with their breaches, and you can just have some value breaches that are pretty good while still having the crazy stuff with like bolts and DRCs and baubles and whatnot. So that'd be my answer to the question. Hopefully I gave you all some time to think about it.
Okay. So I'm gonna give a little peek behind the drive to work mad scientist hammer brain that happens every morning when I'm driving to work. I'm sitting at the stoplight. It's 2 minute stop, not 2 minute stoplight. It's a minute and a half stoplight. I got 90 seconds every morning on my way to work, where I sit there and I think, how am I gonna make hammer the best I can on it again? Esper Sentinel out. It doesn't work. It's not good anymore. We accept this. Orcish Bowmasters, good. Very good. Good card. Play 4. Our mana can support this. Teferi, good card. Very good card. Play 3. Maybe 4. Mana can support this. How? Springleaf Drum. Paradise Mantle. We got what is it? Forge Anew, the enchantment. Pure Steel Paladin, kinda sus. Need artifact count. Haven't figured that part out yet. That's what the hold is. But I'm thinking like 4 Springleaf Drum, 1 to 2 Paradise Mantle, 4 Ornithopters, real aggressive the artifact count, real aggressive the 2 toughness count. Bowmasters, it's bodies for your Springleaf Drums and your equipment, and it's that little bit of interaction you need. Holds down the 1 ring decks. Think about it. That's what I got.
So I think that for me, I look at creativity. I see the number of like spell pierces and like the importance of spell pierce and things like that. But I also look at like kind of the speed of modern right now and the cards that matter. And I would cut. This is like so tiny, but like I would cut 1 spell pierce for an Izzet Charm in basically every single creativity list that I've ever seen. There's quite a few reasons. I also think that like the one persist and like having 1 persist and having the black cards is also still relevant. It depends because you're just a Fable of the Mirrorbreaker deck, and Izzet Charm just kind of feeds into that better than Spell Pierce does. Its modes are really good. It gives you an answer on the play to things that are really good against you. You have to be able to answer early creatures, and I think that we get too caught up into making everything an all-in version of different decks. And I think that creativity, one of its strengths is that it is a control deck. Like, at its core, it is a combo control deck, and we too often treat it as a combo deck to, like, have the most creativity. It's like, I see Transmogrify in this deck, and I'm like, this is nonsense. Like, there's actually no reason to play this card. So, that would be my answer. I'm gonna be honest, really quick. This next part of the show, I only did because I really appreciate the passion of this person and their consistency on the show. And you gotta give people their props. So Keegan MTG, this is for you. Keegan says, "Congratulations on a great year of content. I hope the best for you all in 2024. I can't wait to hear about the standard RCQ season prep and for the February RC. I'm gonna bring some spicy scam lists. I'll let you know if any of mine 5-0. I'll be a dad next week. Congratulations. So I will have another thing besides Magic to be always improving on in 2024. That being said, if any of you play against a tired young dad on green-black in MagicCon Chicago, don't go easy on me. Paternity leave is basically Pro Tour prep. LOL. This person is our self-proclaimed biggest YouTube fan, and I always appreciate their comments. And I just wanted to give them a shout out and say congratulations on your kid. Like, it's such a big thing to be doing. As somebody that just had 3 days with kids, it's super hard.
Literally hashtag growing the game.
Mason says true, but he was...
Oh, I was muted. My bad. I forgot I was muted because I was popping. True!
Hashtag grow the game.
No, honestly, like, just major shout out. It's always cool to see, our listenership grow, right? And, like, obviously your kid's going to listen to our show and things like that, but your YouTube comments give me lifeblood. and I want to shout you out and say thank you so much. So yeah.
They also give the algorithm lifeblood. I gotta tell this anecdote. I know I told you guys like last week when it happened, but my parents went out and got lunch with my brother and my sister-in-law, and at lunch, my brother was like, I opened up YouTube the other day. Guess what they got? Guess what he got on his homepage? Recommended. CCMTG, baby. Hashtag always promoting. Keep the comments coming. Y'all are killing it. Especially, like, yeah, I really do appreciate it. It really does make a difference. Like, seriously, if you love the show and you want to see us grow and succeed and improve and, keep on doing what we're doing and getting the recognition that you feel we deserve, those comments are huge, and they are making a difference. So I really want to say thank you to all the YouTube watchers and commenters out there.
Yeah. Shoot me an address too, and I'll if you need something from the swag shop on CCMDG, we'll drop you something, Keegan. Congratulations again. Yeah, if you want to join the conversation, the Patreon Discord is a great way to do that. The standard channels are popping off, like to the point where I actually am struggling to keep up. 20, like I'll go into the Discord, I'm like 20 messages. How do I read all these? Really cool to see like people really using the Discord to have discussions and try to improve its standard, getting ready for standard season. The public Discord is also available. That's just the He's a Game Media Discord. The YouTube comments we've already mentioned. And then you follow the show on Twitter at CCMTG. So, like, sub, comment, review, all those things. We got to come up with so Spotify lets you like have a question associated with your podcast. We got to come up with a good one for the show. So if you have any thoughts on that, let us know. But if you want to find me, you can do so at He's a Game. You can find me every single week on Constructive Criticism YouTube channel, battling it out with Matt Kling on Constructive Clash. We're almost solely focusing on the format of the time, just making sure stuff, that we're delivering content. Really appreciate the people interacting this week. You can also find me every week on Neat Nerd, and then, of course, every month on Smash Through, a podcast about always improving at Smash Bros. Abe, where can we find you?
You can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. That's really about all. I don't have a lot going on that I'm tweeting. I'm tweeting out this year. Song I listen to every day, all year until I forget. I don't know. I've talked a lot about how I think I've said it in the show a few times when I plug it. I just really do like talking about music. If you have music you want to recommend me, DM it to me. I've been getting a lot more into listening to music again, but that's just like a little product. But with the PT and the RC coming up, you're not going to see a lot from me for that. But you can follow and be ready for my winner photo as I hoist the PT trophy.
I was going to tell you that I look forward to that tweet every day. I have yet to listen to a song, but I actually planned on making a playlist of the songs for January and listening to them. So.
Oh, I will be posting the playlist month by month. Don't worry.
Oh, perfect.
It's all.
Dude,
I have it out of the content strategy. It's just it's not very active.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Mason?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can reach out to me for coaching there or via email, when my email is masoneClark@gmail.com. Put coaching in the description, that way I know you're there. I am fairly booked up for most of January. I have a few spots left. I have people linked with the RC, so if you want to reach out, sooner is better. I basically have the rest of the month pretty locked in, so I'm going to do that. And you can catch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/NateMasonClark when I get chances to do that, which probably won't be till after the RC, for being totally honest, but it will be a thing. And you'll be able to catch me on some other exciting stuff that I get to talk about in a week or two. So a little preview for that. There'll be more to find me soon enough.
Awesome. Hey, what did you learn on the show this week?
I actually didn't know what Mason had. Like this, I guess this show was the first time I heard about what Mason was talking about in terms of data and just all of the matches being published again, and all the deck lists being published again, so they can actually run the matchup stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see how people work with that data, because it does actually, right, like a matchup can change in percentage over time as players become more familiar, and certain, like, right, things change in terms of like how people are configuring their sideboards and such. But seeing that, like, that in a larger data sets in Magic is just a really interesting thing, because there aren't many, and we've not had them for a long time because of the lack of like GPs and such. So it'll be really, really cool. That I didn't know that was happening.
Mason, what'd you learn this week?
I learned that Abe doesn't read my messages earlier in the day today, and it breaks my heart. So what did you read? What did you learn today?
That's so unfair.
No one said it was fair. And also, I saw you reply in that chat later.
I'm like lightheaded. So this is, I don't know if people are gonna like this, but I learned that Modern is maybe the least open that it's been in a long time. So the thing is like we talked about, we talked about 9 decks. Only 4 of them really had points, and we actually really talked about 10 decks because we also talked a little bit about creativity. And I would say that I won't say which ones, but I would say that there are only 5 reasonable gamer decks to me right now, which has to be the least in Modern. It's literally as far back as I actually don't even remember a time where I would have said that. And I don't know what that means for Modern. But yeah, I think that this is the least open Modern has ever been in my memory. So, ooh, that was a sour note to end the show on. Thank you everybody so much for listening. We'll see you all next time with another CC MTG.